Yeah, it's gonna get.
I don't like these weather shifts.
They're okay. I mean, it should shift like naturally, but the thing, like, you know,
I
it
don't like the
should just,
dramatic ones.
yeah,
Like,
where it's like 80 degrees, like it's like 50
Yeah.
degrees and then it's 80 degrees, and that
I,
becomes a little much.
I weep for the earth, but I'm happy for the warmth.
Yeah. Well, kind of like it's mid-October now. It's time for it to get cold.
Yeah, but like, dude, it was 85 degrees the other day.
It was a little much.
Got a lot. 85 degrees.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in abundant praise, beseeching Him in His majesty to send His peace and blessings upon our beloved Messenger Muhammad, peace be upon him, and all of those who follow them in the best of ways, upon him, his family, his companions, and all of those who follow them in the best of ways until the end of time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all amongst them. So what I'll do is, we started the actual text of the book.
Oh, so what was before? Like, what were you reading
We
prior?
were doing the introduction, the foreword and the introduction. So that was kind of just all like a...
Backstory information.
Yeah, just basically an introduction.
Context.
Yeah. So, and we read the first part of the first couple of paragraphs of the first part. So, because there aren't chapter headings, it's just it's divided into part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. A lot of historical books in the Muslim tradition, they don't have like very complex names. And they're not divided into like, oh, this has this title, and this heading, and this heading, and this and that. It's just very simple because it's like a treatise that's just on this. So like, there's another book that I'm ordering a copy of, which was written by a Yemeni scholar for the last couple of hundred years, Imam Haddad. It's called the Book of Assistance, a treatise on assistance, and he outlines 40-something odd like advices. And the first one is on conviction, on yaqeen. And so it's not like, it's just, he starts off like on this subject, on this subject, on this subject. It doesn't have like, I'm going to go through like endless this.
So a lot of it is up to interpretation.
Sorry?
A lot of it is up to interpretation. Because it's not like super structured.
No, it's just that the scholars of the past were such polymaths that like their extemporaneous speech was just like...
Wait, pause. What is extemporaneous mean?
Extemporaneous is just like off the cuff.
Oh, okay.
That they're just like such geniuses, and that they, when they spoke, it was just so structured anyways, that it kind of just, later on, like titles and things were added.
Yeah. Based on what they were talking about.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So here, because this is like the second book that was written on the subject of the soul, there aren't subject headings written. Although there are themes that you can see kind of.
Yeah, clearly defined themes, but.
So what I'll do is I'll reread the last like the first paragraph of this, because that's all we read, the first and second paragraph. And we'll just start going through it and then have a discussion through it. So the author Ibn al-Husayn as-Sunami says, I shall here describe some of these characteristics and some of these actions of futuwah, of chivalry, and support them by the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the declarations, actions, conduct, and virtues of our elders. In this and in all I do, I beseech the aid of Allah, who suffices me and who is the best of guardians. So the first, bring joy into the lives of your friends and meet their needs. In a hadith that comes through us, through Abdurrahman ibn Muhammad ibn Mahmud, Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Yahya, Muhammad ibn al-Azhar, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Basri, Ya'na ibn al-Maymun, Yazid al-Zaqashi, through Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, When one brings joy with his words into the life of a believer or satisfies his worldly needs, whether small or large, it becomes an obligation upon Allah to serve him, to offer him a servant on the day of last judgment. So we went over this very briefly last week. So the advice is bring joy into the lives of your friends and meet their needs. So usually the setup of the book is there's a piece of advice and then it's supported by an ayah of Quran or a hadith or what's called an athar, a saying of a sahabi, or something of one of the righteous predecessors, or some action, some short story or whatnot. So here he's saying that bring joy into the lives of your friends and meet their needs. And the hadith was when one brings joy with his words into the life of a believer or satisfies his worldly needs, whether small or large, it becomes an obligation upon Allah to offer him a servant on the day of the last judgment. Second, respond to cruelty with kindness and do not punish for an error. In a hadith that comes, I'm going to skip over we'll just do the chain here. So what I mentioned to Ilyas last week is that even what the author says, the author of the book says, is that every single hadith.
Is this about Sufi Chivalry?
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? My name is Amir.
Amir?
I'm sorry I'm late.
No.
We have like the finals case.
Oh, not at all. Please have a seat. We just started.
My name's
Amir.
Ramir.
What is it?
Ramir.
Romir.
Amir.
Amir and
Rida.
Bida. Nice to meet you.
Grad student?
I'm an MBA student, yes.
Inshallah.
Yes. So
So we just started reading.
who's the book by?
The book is by Ibn al-Husayn al-Sulami. It's the second treatise on Tasawwuf. So maybe you've heard of Al-Risala al-Qushayriya. That's the earliest book.
Qushayri?
Qushayriya.
Okay.
Al-Risala al-Qushayriya. This is a much smaller book, and it was translated by a Turkish scholar.
Right.
From.
I apologize for interrupting the session.
No.
I do have like a few questions just so I don't become a bottleneck later.
Okay. Sure.
So do we do this on a weekly basis?
Yes.
Excellent. And is this the only group or is the group usually bigger than this?
It fluctuates.
Fluctuates.
A max we've had so far is 4.
Okay.
But now we're at
5.
Well, now that was 4 or 5. I think it was the max we had is 4. Now we have 3. There's one student who regularly comes who's not here as yet.
Okay.
I came first time last week.
Yeah.
Good. And the tradition here is that the Sayyid just reads and we take parts in reading, or is it more like a Socratic method where somebody reads and there's a discussion? Like, is it like more like?
It's more so the setup of the book itself is that it's just a series. Since it's very short, and there's just a list of like advices, and it's divided. The book itself is divided into 5 parts. The first couple of classes, what we did was we went through kind of an introduction of Tasawwuf and the different names that it has in Islam, and kind of the science behind it. And then we went through some of the stories that the author mentions in his foreword about like the exemplification of futuwa by the Sahaba.
Okay.
Because Chivalry is translated as futuwa, and Sufi is Tasawwuf. And I'm sure you might know a little bit of the background.
Yeah.
So we literally just started the first advice, and we're starting the second advice. And what my plan was to read each one of them, and then if anyone has any reflections or whatnot, then we can have them in sort of just a discussion format.
Okay.
But what I did want to do is the intention is to try to finish the whole book over the course of the semester. So if there's something that requires explanation, then we can do that. If there's something that makes sense, let's move on to the next one, and just move on to the next one.
Sounds good. And like I come from a tradition where and my background is it's more of the Socratic
Hanafi as well.
So it's more of Socratic and going a bit back and forth. But most of the people who taught me Tasawwuf were from Tarim.
Okay.
Dar al-Mustafa, if you're familiar with them, the Ali Jafri people. So it's
one of my teachers studied there for 10 years.
No way, mashallah. That's good.
He's actually the chaplain at Harvard, Sheikh Khalil Abdul Rashid. He studied at Dar al-Mustafa in Tarim for 10 years.
Because I'll be attending Harvard next semester maybe. So
Okay, inshallah.
it's good to know. And when you go to the Ghazali and Shafi'i method, it's more like there's a bureaucracy between the Sayyid and the students. So I just was trying to know.
This is mostly more a just reading an early text
Okay, so it's just
discussion
like much
based.
simpler. Okay.
Yeah, it's much
Alright,
simpler.
good, good.
The intention was to try to draw students for those who aren't familiar necessarily with like what Sufi and what Tasawwuf actually is, to give just like a basic sort of discussion about that, which we did in the first couple of classes, and then secondly, the chivalry part, because that's something that is unfortunately becoming more and more absent
Okay.
in our society,
Yeah.
and just trying to go through a very like the second text in Tasawwuf that's written in our tradition. And I also wanted to, if we have time, pair it with Sheikh Abdul Ghadda's Islamic Manners book. And he's an honor of Syria for of the last of this the 20th century. He passed away in the 90s.
So that was my last question, which is there a certain protocol of adab I should follow?
Meaning,
Meaning, like, there's adab when you sit down with the teacher. Are we expected to uphold these standards here, or is it more loose? Like, what's the
that's
sense?
much, I'm the Muslim chaplain, and I think we're probably like we're all well, the undergrads are the ones who are like younger than me usually. There's so I'm 30. I don't know how old you are. Yeah, so we're the same age. There's no like, I'm not an alim. I've studied part time like as rigorously as I can with my shuyukh for the last 10 years, but I'm not in like some high place, and I don't have the way in which I deal with my students is just like a very informal sort of.
So I think taught you very well, because I can see the humbleness in you, and hopefully I'll be part of that change. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khairan for being here. It's good to have another Hanafi. Like, Boston's actually filled with a lot of Hanafis. A lot of Hanafi ulama.
I think in the US I'm going to go towards Maliki.
Really?
The scenario planning method and being in an urban center.
Well,
But we can talk about
we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
Let's
'cause it's
go with
really
the because Ramir also has to leave at 7. We should get through the text.
Also, I have no idea what you guys just said.
It's okay.
So the Hanafi uses the Socratic method.
Okay.
Shafi'i tends to use the Aristotelian method, and the Maliki is more about like being in an urban center and how to conduct your life in an urban center. I think. I mean, I'm just saying this so you can know how much I know, and you can know where my gaps are.
I mean, so my teachers have been across the board, and I'm Hanafi in terms of fiqh and Maturidi in terms of aqidah. But like in terms of tasawwuf, I haven't really had like a regimented, because so I've done parts of the Dars Nizami of the Deobandi system because a few of my shuyukh are Deobandi.
Okay.
And then so I've had teachers who are Azhari. I've had one of my shuyukh, one of my teachers. He's got 10 years of qualifications from Tarim, from Dar Mustafa and the Shafi Madhab. Then he studied under Sheikh Amin of Istanbul for 10 years. So he's Shafi and Hanafi, but like in terms of his fiqh. And so I've had teachers from all over. In terms of tasawwuf, it's mainly been like just reading like Risalat al-Mustarshideen, the Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasideen, or the Ihya of Imam al-Ghazali. Just like kind of going through those, and like student teacher, just them reading the text, just going through it, and then also suhbah. I haven't like committed myself to like the Ba'dawi order or the Shadhanis or the Naqshbandi or whatnot. We'll see, or we'll see if I get there. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and the purpose of this is most undergrads are very unaware of any of this. So I thought a good place to start, just like generally, would be pick the topic of tasawwuf because it's very widely applicable to everyone, Muslim and non-Muslim, and then go from there and see what happens. And especially this book, it talks mainly about there's aspects of ihsan, but then also there's a lot of emphasis on fulfilling your rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, which are your basic Islam and Imani rights. So, can we continue? All right. So I'll just reiterate the first hadith that we went through, the first advice, and then we'll move quickly to the second one. Bring joy into the lives of your friends and meet their needs. In a hadith that comes through us through Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "When one brings joy with his words into the life of a believer, or satisfies his worldly needs, whether small or large, it becomes an obligation upon Allah to offer him a servant on the day of Last Judgment. The second, respond to cruelty with kindness and do not punish for an error. And a hadith that comes through us through I'll read the full chain. So the translator mentions that only for the first 2 points he mentions the entire sanad, the entire chain of narration, and then for the sake of brevity he takes all of them out. In the original text, so the just so that you probably know what a hadith is, right? Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So a hadith, usually people think that it's just a saying in oral tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, right? But a hadith actually has 2 parts to it. One is the sanad, and the matan, and the second is the matan. The sanad is the chain of transmission, and the matan is the actual text, the actual what the Prophet ﷺ actually said, or what he did, like the description of what he did, or his silent approval on something. So the sanad that's mentioned, that we did, like Abdurrahman ibn Muhammad ibn Mahmud through Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Yahya, like all that is every single person, like this person heard from this person, heard from this person, heard from this tabi'i, heard from this sahabi.
Just to give context to the credibility.
Yep. So and just a quick point also, we know the profiles of each one.
Right.
So that way we can judge who's lying, who's not.
Yeah. Just like the whole science of tasawwuf, there's a whole, under the science of hadith, there's a whole sub-science of narrators of hadith, where every single person's, there's books of biographies of like you can narrate from this person, he's strong in his memory until here, and then until he became this, like he reached this age. After this age, only relate from him like what he's written down, because his memory started to decrease, right? That's just like an example, but
a whole
we have
lot of
books.
context.
Like
So
a guy whose son was died and then he lost his memory.
yeah, there could be all different sorts of reasons, but the thing is, the people, especially Muslims, it infuriates me when Muslims say like, oh, I don't trust hadith in the Quran, right? And like a brand new thing, right? But like when you say like you don't believe hadith, right? Our hadith are rigorously documented than anything else, than any other historical fact, right? Because you have like primary sources and secondary sources. You have primary sources, and like we have biographies of every single person
Who made it claim.
who makes that claim, right?
So when he says a hadith, and please know everything from the time of the Prophet.
Whereas like the rest of the world's history is basically based upon like memoirs and like letters here, like scraps of information
together.
Something I only learned about after high school history. We're like, okay, so all of our documents are like, there's primary sources and secondary sources, but the thing is, we're basing the entirety of like our history on like one person from one artist, anything about like who they what sort of person they were, if they were an upright person, if they were to lie or not, if they were a philanderer or like this or that. Whereas in the Muslim tradition, not all.
Yeah,
all of the largest literary work in the world is the nation work.
There are people who memorize like now. There's no such like a hafidh now. It's a hafidh. Hafidh traditionally, and it was someone who had memorized 100,000 hadith with their chains of narration. Wow. Like in their mind, right? So there's not like fortunately and unfortunately, the Western academic tradition cannot compare at all. Yeah. Right? It can't. It doesn't hold like a drop in an ocean, but it does. Yeah. And on top of that, it's such like I don't know. It's so disheartening that Muslims are I'm worried about my own background because it doesn't seem like it's what's popular.
It's not aligning.
Yeah. Whereas we have evidence.
It's like the sun being an alien things, so blessed are they aliens?
Strangers.
Or strangers.
Aliens, yeah. It's another thing of okay. So the second. Respond to cruelty with kindness and do not punish for an error. In hadith comes to us through Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad ibn Sadih al-Jawhari, through Abdullah ibn Abdullah ibn There's no Arabic in here, that's what I'm trying. Through Ishaq ibn Ibrahim. See that in here?
Should I? But I'm not sure. I'm not going to.
There's no apostrophe, so I don't think there's an ayn. Ishaq ibn Ibrahim al-Hamli, Tabisa, through Asnain, through Abu Ishaq, through Abu al-Ahwas, that Abu al-Ahwas' father asked the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam whether if he were to go to a close friend and the man would not help him, he should do the same to a friend asked for help. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said no. So I'll read that again. Abu al-Ahwas' father asked the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam if he were to go to a close friend and the man would not help him, he should do the same to the friend if he asked for help. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said no.
So even if you were at help, you still help the same person.
Yeah, even if you were denied help, and you not deny that person help, right? So Allah says that like repay with which is better.
Mm.
So our baseline is for ihsan is working well with people. Do not find fault with friends. Through Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Bazari, learn that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you start seeking faults in Muslims, you will cause dissent among them, or you will at least start dissension. So if you start faults in Muslims, you will cause dissent among them, or you will at least start dissension.
What is meant by faults in this scenario?
Well, it depends, right? So, faults that you can cover. So, one is, I don't know, if someone has like a habit of something, and you're able to, if you're able to cover that person's like faults.
What do you mean cover?
Sorry?
What do you mean cover that?
Like, don't post it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like, yeah.
This is something.
But there is a saying by the Prophet, and I think it's a core value. It's a core value, which is command to church. So if I see someone's bad habit, I'm not post it on Facebook, but can I at least tell him don't do it?
Yeah,
So
like, what does it mean to like point out a fault? Like publicly is one thing, but
Right.
Can I do it privately?
So, Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar is to command people with that which is ma'ruf, which is loosely translated as good, that which is good. Ma'ruf is literally what is known, but supposed to be what is known in a society of like good, virtuous conduct, but also dependent on the society. Because right now, good, virtuous conduct in our society is not necessarily good, practically, right? From wrong, that has conditions. So, if it's something like a very simple thing that you know if you see someone doing something wrong, you know for a fact, like you've 100% confidence that if I go and correct that person's action, they will probably listen to me, and you should go ahead and do that as like a rule of thumb. But if you have like an inkling of a thought that like this person doesn't seem like they'll listen to me, even if I come to them in the gentlest of manners, then it's not necessarily the best option to try to correct their conduct right then and there. Unless it's going to harm others.
But it's gonna cost them to the other way.
Yeah.
So sometimes maybe I do whatever I can to make sure that they stop that self-harm. Sometimes it's by the tongue, sometimes it's by doing nothing, sometimes by action. Correct?
Yeah.
Right.
I would agree.
I
Because
just want to like divide them.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's like a very good way of getting them out, right? Because if you see someone who's going like, I don't know, walk or running, even on like campus, right, with like headphones in, and you see that they're not, or like driving recklessly, right? Driving recklessly on campus, it would be, and if you see that, it would be your duty to go, like you go and stop that person in the car, right? Because you could possibly get wrong, but you could call public safety, right? Because that person shows that he or she is presenting an immediate harm to their family, right? And probably to
Call me out. I'll figure out a way.
we figure out some sort of like way
Yeah.
use telethesis, but if it's something that's not going to immediately harm someone else, right? That I mean, this is very, very context dependent, right?
Yeah.
If someone's sitting in their car with their car on, and they're like just revving their engine, and they're using up gas, like on a very, very broad scale, even if like no one else cares about it,
It's still like harming the environment.
it could be harming the environment, right? But then, if the person takes your advice, are you to give that person your advice at that point in time or not?
Yeah, and I think one of them, which I just discovered, one of the reasons for that is that you can't get people used to saying no to you, because that impacts your image for them as Muslim, right? So if I keep saying no to you, I will belittle you in the future,
Yeah.
right? Now, so like, it's the idea of dignity and the idea
It
of
has like
saying
a-
something. When people are used to saying yes, it's really important to maintain that image as a change agent. Um, but yeah, I remember an example, like if somebody tells you I killed somebody, will God forgive me, versus somebody will tell you if I want to kill someone, God forgive me. These are two different answers.
But that's very high level. Let's get an example like a little bit. Hopefully, inshallah, none of us will have to encounter someone.
Treatment, yeah.
If you can prevent something from happening, that would be great. But like,
But you have to, like, what you said, like, you have to have what else weird something over like the impact of like your
Yeah.
actions on what they're doing. Or,
you have to have some degree of certainty of the action of that person, whether it's actually harm or not, whether it's actually bad, like evil or not, and then also how will your actions to remedy that situation be taken, right? Because if you see someone, if you are a husband, right, and you have a wife, kids, this is something that we talked about, like during when we were talking the hadith some years ago. Literally, like whoever among you sees a sort of a munkar, an evil, then you should change it. One should change it with his hand, and if not, then with one's tongue, and if not, with one's heart, and that's the weakest form of faith. The example that we were given is that if you're someone, you have a family, you have a spouse and kids, and you see someone getting robbed, right? And even if you're able to stop that person, but the thing is, if you're to
like get
if
home,
you
they're
might
gonna die.
if you might get killed,
Yeah.
and you have responsibility, right? Is it better to intervene?
Right. So it's just you have to take full contact.
But how about Hussein? Wasn't March for this stuff?
He was giving an example
sorry.
of like that's because if you're on the street in Massachusetts, right, there's someone like you see someone getting mugged, right? Of course, the best thing you could do in that situation, if you had the power, if you had the ability to
Like disarm
overcome,
them.
disarm the other person, right? You are well endowed in your martial arts skills and your disarming and self-defense, all those sorts of things, right? But if you're someone who like you've never been in a fight in your life, right, and you're not a particularly strong person, you intervening, if it will cause like that person will get killed and you will get killed,
You're being reckless.
then you're being reckless, right? You're not being smart. Hussein radiallahu anhu, right? He was someone who like isn't like that's a very different circumstance, and he was also someone who, I mean, he was the grandson of the Prophet. He had a whole reasoning behind all of the actions that he did. We can't go into historical analysis,
Yeah.
but
I understand. Thank you.
definitely responding to cruelty with kindness, right? So not faults. Right? We're on the faults of Muslims. If the fault, however, right, is something that is public. If you know that there's someone who, this happens a lot in like marriage situations, right? If someone is known to be a liar or a cheater or something like that, backbiting is something that we're not supposed to do.
Right. What do you mean backbiting?
Backbiting as in speaking about
Oh, like
someone else without their knowledge.
like gossip.
Gossip, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also like them being around. Like, would I say that to other people? If he wasn't
Right.
around?
But primarily the hadith that's very explicit and clear is that you say something about your brother or sister in humanity with them not present, that they would not like, right? And the Sahaba asked the Prophet, but what if it's true?
Right.
And he said, if it weren't true, then it would be slander. if it is true, it's still backbiting. It's still messy, right?
So what if you would have also settled if they were there because you believe it's true and you would want them to know what you think is true?
And like, so the
That has nothing to do with
condition
it.
was whether they would like it or not.
Oh, okay, that's it. That's the only condition.
What if it's gonna be like help save somebody else?
So this is the exception, right? That, for example, in business dealings and in marriage, right? Like contractual things where someone else, so that harm can be transferred to someone else.
Because it's like a
Those instances, those are situations in which you are allowed to speak the truth about someone, if it would be classified under backbiting. Because if you know someone to be, if
Like
you,
patient and doctor agreements, right? With
fiduciary
psychologists.
agreement.
uh,
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, with regard to
Yes.
with regard to doctor reality, all that sort, that goes into a much deeper legal realm that I don't want to.
Yeah.
But like, a very easy example is that if you have a close friend and he or she is looking into someone to get married, right? But that person has like a track record of being a lying person, of not earning halal. And this is something that a lot of people that I've encountered, right? People have been divorced because their spouse has lied to them about their own personal situations, right? Or that they use drugs or something like that. If you know something about that person, then and that person comes and asks you, right? A sister comes and asks you, do you know about brother A? And like some background about him, I'm interested in him for marriage. If you know that person, smokes or drinks or whatever, and you know that this person who's inquiring about him would not want that in a potential spouse, then you should know that.
so what degree do you go?
Yeah. And with regard to business dealings, right? If someone comes to you on a business school campus, before you enter a business agreement with someone, you can do your diligence in checking their background, right? If they're known to, have committed fraud in the past or whatnot, or if they don't keep their promises with regard to business dealings, then you can tell a person who's asked you about that.
So you obtain the right to be
Up
privy
until
to
the extent that it would fulfill like that person is not going to be a trustworthy person for business dealings, you are allowed to say up until that point. You can't go above and beyond and say like this person's a horrible person and then like
It
rag
has to be
on them.
relevant. It has
Like
to be
don't
relevant.
use it, don't use it.
Right.
Yeah, use it in its specific context.
Intended.
A quick question. He says brothers and sisters in humanity. Was it like, did he really mean in humanity or just brothers and sisters and in context the Sahaba thought it was Muslims or?
So I'm saying that because the word akhi, the word brother, when used by the Prophet, can have multiple levels.
Okay.
Right? Imam al-Nawawi comments on the famous hadith, also narrated by Anas ibn Malik, of none of you truly believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And Imam al-Nawawi comments that the first level of brotherhood is actual blood brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
The second level of brotherhood is brotherhood and sisterhood. Right? Sisterhood is always implied, brother and sister,
Right.
in iman, right? Faith. And thirdly, in humanity. Right? So Imam al-Nawawi commented on that hadith specifically, that because the Prophet ﷺ didn't restrict it to other Islam or an Iman, that it can be looser, right? In general, the context is that you don't talk about people, right? You don't talk poorly about people without them knowing.
So it's the hierarchy of chastity. So you start with the inner family members and then to your community and then to the humanity.
Because even like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says like وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى مَسَاكِينَ, you should have excellence, your parents, and those people who are close to you, and the people and the orphans, and the masakin, and those people who are needy, right? And then other ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ, and are out in the path. وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, those people who are in the control, under the authority, under your authority. Some Mufassirun
It's
comments.
the most beautiful position I heard.
Well, I'm trying to be as diplomatic translation as context as possible.
But it's really accurate.
But that extent, right? There's Sheikh Murad al-Hajj just passed away this if you look into this man that so I never got to meet him, and I'm kind of angry that my brother, although while he was studying in Morocco, didn't go to meet him in Mauritania. So lesson in jurisprudence where there was some issue around like the buying and selling of like an animal. If there is an animal that has a defect in it, right? What's the ruling, like how much you have to tell or say about this, or what the value or whatnot, right? One of the students said, like, because they were talking about an animal with a defect, they said, oh, like the animal of such and such, as an example. This is a concrete example of like an animal that has a defect. And Sheikh Murad al-Hajj said, don't back it. So he's giving not technically like not what we would think of back. Right? The student was asking like a question for clarification using a concrete example, right? Not saying anything bad about the animal itself or the owner of the animal. Yes, but Sheikh Murad he classified that as backbiting. It was an animal, right? That had a it was an animal, right? That had a defect. Objectively, it had some sort of defect. But even speaking about that, so that's real ihsan. That's real ihsan, right? That's like not.
So even respecting.
I mean, rights of animals that's a whole. You only know we have in Israel this whole chapter on like how one respecting one's animals and whatnot. Get back to it's 7:00 and it's almost 7:00, and you're gonna have to leave. We'll get for 10 minutes because then I have to order pizza. So you're welcome. We'll talk about that. What are you doing here? Answer: we swear by the one who sent you as a prophet, not the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Go to the house such and such man among those who have invited us to this city. Because this is related to food, because the one was related to food. Find fault with free. With Muhammad ibn Muhammad Sabih or Sabi, that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu never looked down upon any food presented to him. He ate it if he had appetite, and he did not eat it if he had no appetite. Meaning no appetite for it, he didn't incline toward it. So those, right, a follower of Futuh, someone of true chivalrous behavior, and Imam mentions this in his book, The Duties of Brotherhood, that if people actually have a true sense of brotherhood, then you like the possessions of one are the possessions of the other.
Right.
There's no restrictions, there's no restrictions. An example that comes to mind is I was staying with one of my friends for a week in LA, and I went out and I went to dinner, and I had leftovers in a box, and then I was out. I had told my friend that I had this leftover, and I left it in his kitchen. He was gracious. He went for hosting me for a week, right? And so the day surprising that I got this food, and I really liked it, but I couldn't finish the entire thing. It was in his fridge. The next day, I came back, and I was asking, like, hey, so-and-so, I don't want to mention his name, did you finish the Manchurian beef that I got? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, good. I just wanted to know because like it wasn't rich, and I was looking for something. He was like, yeah. He was like, my wife was like, my wife saw me take your food out of the fridge, and she was like, it was okay for you to eat his food? And he was like, Bilal's food, yeah, it was okay. And like he's like my brother, right? And he's letting me say this. When he took I didn't like. Of course, I don't feel at all bad. Not that it's like his food basically, but although there are etiquette, like and visiting friends and relatives and whatnot. But when you have a true sense of like intimate brotherhood, you shouldn't feel any sorts of hesitations.
Thank you.
We can talk about this one and then
And also, please, in my conduct, during the conversation, boundary?
no, not at all. Not at all. I'm actually glad to have someone else who's got like a little bit more study under them.
Not at all. So I'm looking forward to learning from you.
Okay, so let's reread this. Do not find fault with food offered to you. We hear from Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Sabih that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said, "The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never looked down upon any food presented to him. He ate it if he had appetite, and he did not eat it if he had no appetite for it."
So we wouldn't taste it and then throw it out.
Yeah.
Out of respect. Yeah.
This, I mean, I remember there was I can't remember what, in the lizard, right, that there was this one dish that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was eating with Khalid bin Walid, with one of his aunts, right, that like he didn't incline toward this lizard, this desert lizard, and Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu anhu, he asked the Prophet ﷺ, like, is it haram? And the Prophet ﷺ said, like, it's just not found amongst my people. But like now we have.
So amongst his people, he meant within the Hashemite tribe, or
Yeah.
amongst his people like the Muslims?
Amongst his
Or prophets?
I'm guessing, educated guessing, amongst the Hashmi.
Yeah.
Because Khalid bin Walid was still part of Quraysh.
Yeah.
And this was still like they were eating and of course this was Khalid bin Walid and
Khalid bin Walid always had an issue with food, by the way. Like a lot of stories that deal with food come from Khalid.
Really?
Yeah, like Umar bin al-Khattab, when Khalid bin Walid invited him and there were like different fruits, and Umar bin al-Khattab cried and he said like, Prophet only had access to one food.
Never found fault in it anyways.
Yeah.
But this is something that like so many people complain about food. I mean, there's one thing like you're not inclining towards something, but then a whole other thing about.
There's a verse in the Quran that talks about people that are lost and how those who choose to be. I think so. Like I don't want to do tahrif, but I remember the Mufassir. This is what he was talking about. Is that the idea? One of the characteristics of being lost is to follow like four pleasures. So like food and so on, because people they have no way to get sentiment. Good sentiment. Like there's no meditation, there's nothing. So what's going to keep their adrenaline and dopamine up? Like, it's food, you know. It's like I don't know.
And like the whole foodie culture that like is developed behind that, which is I appreciate good food.
Yeah.
But
healthy food, yeah.
Good food and healthy food.
And that's why it's mentioned in Jannah. So obviously this culture was also during the Prophet's time, right? So that's why God had to, or it's expected in humanity that foodies will always be a strong culture. So that's why the Quran also influenced that we have algorithm around formulas. So I wanted to say the golden ratio. Are you familiar with the golden ratio? It's like basically where your belly button is from.
Okay.
The location of your belly button to the human body is a specific ratio. So I typed it in the Quran and it's about Shajarat al-Zaqqum. So the verse in the Quran, like if you line up all the verses as a body and you look at the belly button, like where would the belly button be? It's about Shajarat al-Zaqqum in hell.
Wow.
Right? And it talks about they eat from it and then their stomachs explode. So it's like, okay, like at least there's something to the golden ratio. But and it's interesting. Like the verse of Mecca in the Quran is in like the same location of Mecca between the two tectonic plates, like the same ratio as well. Yeah. But I have a quick question to ask you. I have a few quick questions. So first of all, thank you very much for your time.
For like coming and being. I'm glad that there's like a grad
so man, I was sitting in the trim hall and I was thinking, how can I match Sufism with chivalry? And I'm just thinking about that. I was actually here at Reynolds walking, and then I sat at trim, and I was still thinking about that question, and then just popped on the screen like Sufi Chivalry. I was like, okay, I gotta go again.
Small. No, I'm glad that I actually pushed out the flyers to be put on the LCD screens.
Good.
That at least one person's like paying attention to the LCD screens.
So so I do have a few questions. I'll give you a bit of background of what I did. And a bit of my and maybe you can tell me what's your capacity and how you like to interact with students, right? So my name is Amir. I'm Palestinian American from Virginia. My dad is a diplomat. I grew up in a very secular household, so basically, and it's like a nationalistic secular household. So I chose practically, I started praying when I was 23, 24, and I
So very
discovered.
pro-Palestinian Arab, but like very like not Islamic.
So most Palestinians are not Islamic, anti-Islamic, because the Palestinian nationality grew up on an anti-Islamic sentiment in 1873, which was the revolution against the Ottomans, and then they signed the Frankfurt Agreement. So the idea of Palestine came out of a secularization concept, and
I'm gonna stop this because I'm live streaming this for two reasons.
sorry.
One is just to see like how I am
Good.
in like a class setting, because I know how I am in like khutbah settings,
Yeah.
but like dars or like halakas and stuff, it's very difficult for me to like actually keep a conversation going. And then secondly, just in case like
It's
if there's someone
important.
who's